Good Tuesday morning, Moms of Master Books. Hope you're having a fantastic week. Today, I am privileged to be here with author Carrie Lindquist. And Carrie is the author of Foundations Phonics, and she is also the author of Let's Talk Science, is the series name, right?
Yeah.
And the first in the series is Adventures in Creation. And so we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk a little bit about Carrie's backstory as a homeschooler. Now, for those of you who don't know, Carrie is my oldest daughter. She's about 60 and I'm about 80, and not quite. But I tell people that Carrie and I grew up together, and in many ways that's very true. So Carrie is a much wiser and older soul than I am, and I learn a lot from her often. So thank you for joining me, Carrie. I'm glad you were able to make it. Fair warning, there's two grandsons. Carrie has two sons that are in the house, and
Yes.
they've been bribed to be good. So
No promises.
Yeah, so just in case. All right. So first, Carrie, let's talk about Foundations Phonics. This has been out now for 3 years, 2 years.
I think 3 years now, yeah.
This is the third year, I think, right?
I think
2014, or yeah, not 2014, 3 years. What's the heart behind this series? Explain what the heart is behind the series, why you wrote it, and who it's best for, who it appeals to.
Yeah. So the heart behind the series really is the learning to read stage. As your child comes into the stage, it's such a unique time because they're starting to kind of understand some of the more abstract concepts. They're starting to have questions about God and about the Bible. They're also starting to see that the world isn't all okay. There's sickness and there's suffering, and they may even have had to encounter death with the loss of a pet or a loved one. And these are really big questions that they're starting to have. It's also the perfect opportunity to begin developing some of the foundations in why there's suffering in the world and why we see all of these things. And so the big heart behind Foundations Phonics was teaching your child to read, but also developing a strong foundation for why do we see these things in the world? Why did Jesus have to come? How did this all happen, and how do we get here today? And so it really traces the salvation message from creation, from the very beginning, all the way through the Bible to Jesus, so that they have a firm understanding of when did sin and sickness enter the creation? How does sin affect us? And it begins to shape the conversations that you can have with your child, because they're beginning to understand all of the pieces and how it all fits together. And then from there, as they're learning to read, all of these lessons are getting built. And then it also becomes part of the family vernacular. So this spring, my sons had been playing in the yard, and they found a couple of baby birds that had fallen out of the nest and didn't make it. And they were completely devastated that this had happened. And we were able to use the phonics lessons that we've had to begin having these conversations that sin affected Adam and Eve, and it affects us, and it affected all of creation. And sin is such a sad thing, and it separates us from God. But God sent Jesus, and Jesus makes it right for us, and someday God is going to make the world right again. And so these are lessons that they're building and become part of their vernacular, just as they're growing, learning, and understanding. It also kind of begins to set the stage, if your child hasn't already accepted the Lord, that they're now beginning to develop the firm foundational understanding of Jesus didn't just come, he came to actually save us, and that is the narrative through the Bible. The other big component is that teaching your child to learn how to read seems like it's just this big, crazy ordeal. And as your child comes into this phase, I saw so many moms who would think about homeschooling and they'd be like, well, I just can't teach my child to learn how to read. And I wanted to create something that wasn't intimidating, that you can pick this up whether you're juggling infants in the house or a business or a job or whatever's going on. When you pick it up and you look through it, it feels like so much fun. Like you can totally do this, and it's just, you're gonna have a great time with your child. And I really think that the learning to read stage, you have so much fun with your child, and being able to sit there on the couch with them as they make connections and they read their first words and their first sentences, it's the most fun.
it seems like a lot of people are afraid to homeschool because teaching their kid to read is like one of the scariest things. They'll teach them to potty,
Right.
and they'll teach them to walk. They'll teach them all these life skills, but teaching them to read is almost like so intimidating.
Right. And it's really just an extension of all of the things that you're already doing as a parent. You taught them how to use utensils, kitchen utensils. That's a pretty big life skill. You've taught them already how to count all of their colors. You've probably already taught them letters and their sounds. It's really just an extension of that. And so Foundations Phonics enables it to be an extension of that so that you know what to do, what to say. There's activity suggestions, and then you can also customize it however you want for your child to make it like completely one-on-one, which I love seeing the stories of this is how we customize it to work for us, because that was really the heart of it, to make it easy to work with, to make it a lot of fun so that you're developing memories and conversation starters with your student, and that foundation in both reading and in scripture.
So a little bit of Carrie's backstory. We're going to talk more about her homeschooling, but she was homeschooled from second grade through graduation, and then attended Liberty for education, right?
Yep.
So she went to Liberty University for education. And but if you know a little bit about Kristen and I, we owned a business that sold homeschool curriculum. And from the time Carrie was, I think, 14 to
Yep.
20, 14 to 20, Carrie ran a shipping department, but then Carrie ended up actually taking over customer service. And so we had about 20,000 moms annually that Carrie was walking every day, helping moms understand how to use the curriculum. There were quite a few that she walked off the cliff, that were about ready to jump, people that were ready to put their kids back in public school. And you got to see a lot of what worked, what didn't work, what were the places where parents were getting hung up, what was intimidating them, what the successes were. And so that really gave you a good feel for putting together a curriculum of kind of the same format of what works. Let's focus on what works. You can always add to it and build to it, but it really gave you a lot of depth of knowing how curriculum interfaces into a family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that aspect with this, what I tend to see is there are programs that cost, a couple $100. Yeah. And they have flashcards and all kinds of things that go along with it. Some were designed for classrooms and that type of thing. This really was designed to be kind of what would you say, a basics, what you need to go?
Yes, it's the essentials and the most effective essentials. And so it's what you need, and you can build on it and make it more complicated, or more activities. You can add whatever you want to, or you can keep it very simple and just do the instruction however it fits your family. In either case, it's an effective way to do it.
And designed with kind of the millennial mom in mind as well, in that life is full, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sitting at the table.
Pick up and go.
Yeah.
Very pick up and go. The activities are designed, most of them, with stuff that you're going to have on hand, maybe flour, sugar, shaving cream, a lot of materials that you're already going to have on hand. So if you don't have time to plan the week out, you can pick up the book, go do a fun activity with your student. It's not planning intensive, because at that learning to read stage, so many of us were juggling little ones and newborns and jobs and all of this stuff, and homeschooling older kids and maybe younger kids and all of this stuff. I wanted it to be extremely easy to pick up and go. When your student's ready to learn how to read, it's, you can pick it up, you can go, and you're going to have a lot of fun together doing it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, when we were teaching the kids to read, and this goes actually back to, I'd gone to a public school, and then I went to a Christian school in 8th grade, and that's where I met Kristen. And the curriculum that the school used was ACE School of Tomorrow. And they would bring all of us kids into opening exercises, and we would do their ABCs of ACE. And ABCs of ACE would be, there would always be like a song that goes along, like the aging ape was out of shape because he ate and ate and ate. Milton the mule, he made a mistake. Well, he read a map, he walked in the lake. I don't know. There were all these different songs that went with each letter. And we used that for a lot of the instruction in teaching our kids to read. So that was one of the programs that we used with the kids. It was very expensive because it was designed for a classroom. So for a family to buy that program cost quite a bit. And really what was needed sometimes was really just the basics, right? It was the song, it was a letter card, the story, and then some practice. And that background kind of influenced this a little bit as well. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the history of, we'll still sing songs to each other from that background of, somebody will mention ape or mule or something like that. And there's all these silly little songs that our family became part of our family culture. And you kind of wanted this to also have that lasting impact.
Yes, that was another big inspiration for the courses. I was thinking about that one day and how all of those little phrases and the silly rhymes and all of that became part of our family culture. And even 20 years down the road, I still remember so much of that. And I got thinking one day, because it's such a foundational age, what would it look like if so many of those things were coming back to the Bible for me? And so that kind of became a starting point for beginning to think about phonics and how we incorporate the Bible into it, and how this becomes a springboard that 20 years from now, a child would still remember that sin separates us from God, and it's a very sad thing, that throughout all of creation we see God's grand design, that we're saved by God's grace, and all of these lessons, that something 20 years from now would trigger a memory, and that they're coming back to the Bible in that. And so that was a very big component of the course.
Awesome. So this is any program that you have in homeschooling like this with phonics programs, learning to read programs, it just takes a while to kind of break into that market. This year, we're really seeing the growth of this product. We're seeing the success of it. What my heart loves to see is when children are accepting Christ as they're going through and learning to read. And so kudos for that. I think that's one of the byproducts of this curriculum. Not only are kids learning to read, but they're also coming to the realization of who Jesus is and their need for Jesus in their life. So good job on that. All right. So the next curriculum we have is the Let's Talk Science. And I'm going to have you share on that. Just for anyone who's wondering, I actually have a very rough draft. So I'm going to put images up today in the posts so that you can see like what week 2 looks like, what the pages look like for week 2. I'm going to warn everybody that it hasn't been proofed. It's the rough draft. Some things may change. If there's a typo or whatever, don't get too concerned, because I'm just giving you kind of a sneak peek. What happens here is everything kind of develops and they get a template, they build it all together, and then all of a sudden everything goes really quickly. And we're kind of at that stage where it's all coming together very quickly. And I went down to design and I said, hey, if you guys could just give me, a couple lessons so that I can give everybody a sneak peek. And they're like, that never goes well. So I'm taking full responsibility. I'm asking this group, enjoy the preview, but don't get too hung up on something if you see a period out of place, because it's more just meant to give you a kind of an idea of it. Okay, so the Let's Talk Science, Care, you share the heart behind it, and then also how it works, like what a typical week would look like.
Yeah, so the inspiration came about a year ago. I had an opportunity to visit Yellowstone National Park. And while we were there, there was a full day tour with a secular tour guide, and it was extremely interesting. And all of the points he would share, he'd be excited about. And for me, I was sitting on the edge of my seat like, oh my goodness, this is so incredible, because I'm getting to see fingerprints of my Creator and the complexity of the relationships of the ecosystems and the mercy and even the destruction that's there and all of these things. It was such a life-giving experience, because it felt like, again, just being able to see the fingerprint of our Creator. And when I came home, I started thinking about how when I was a kid, I did not like science at all. It was nowhere near my favorite subject. It was dry facts and just information that I had no application for. Now, as an adult, science is so exciting because it lets me catch a glimpse of who God is. You can see his creativity, his organization. Look at the night sky, you see the majesty and the scope of the universe, which we can't even truly comprehend. All of these things, and I started thinking about how I can trigger that wonder and that excitement for science in my own sons. And so I started thinking about kind of the science adventures that we would go on. We'd be studying something in history, and they'd want to know about beavers. For instance, one lesson we did in social studies had beavers. And so we went on this full adventure on beavers and learned all of this stuff and all of these amazing facts that we could then point back to God with. And so that kind of became the inspiration and the heart behind Let's Talk Science, is helping students understand that science is a tool that God has given us to explore and understand and discover the world that he made, and that what we learn in science also points us back to our Creator. And so that became the heart behind the program. Now, in the application of it, it's set up so that there's lessons 3 days a week. And so on the first day, they are learning about or exploring a topic. So maybe it's the first day of creation. So they're studying the first day of creation. God made light and darkness and the earth. And so they're learning about that. On the second day of the week's program, they are exploring that topic, usually in an experiment or some sort of hands-on fashion, so that they are interacting with it. They're making it their own. They're asking questions. They're answering questions. On the third day, they are sharing what they've learned. And so they add a page to a science notebook, and then their job is to go share that with someone. With my kids, as we go through the school day, they take out their materials and we put it into a binder that they've picked out. And then at the end of the day, after dinner, they bring their binders to Dad and talk about what they've learned. And they share with my husband all the things that they learned and what was so fascinating to them. And that's like a highlight of their day. And so we've incorporated that into science, where the student is learning all week and then they're sharing that, or maybe they're walking a parent or a sibling through an experiment that they themselves did. So it's also loosely setting up it's setting up their expectations for like the scientific method, where they're asking the question, they're coming up with hypotheses, they're answering their question, they're sharing what they've discovered, all while they're learning about creation. So the course goes through topically each day of creation. So the first day of creation, week 1, is how we study science, and it's talking about what God made on the first day. Then they're exploring light. So it's light's made of colors, light travels in waves, the rainbow, all of these things, and they're very simplified topics for the age range, but so that they can grasp some of that wonder and the excitement in the universe that God made. And then also drawing lines back of God compares himself. He says he is the light of the world. His word is a lamp unto our feet. These are things that science reminds us of and teaches us about God. Another really fun component of the course is that as it's going through the days of creation, there's also a story component, and that's set up so that as your student is learning how to read, they can also begin to read the story components. And it's set up as an imaginative look at what it must have looked like after the fall as Adam and Eve were teaching their children. Adam and Eve had the opportunity to talk with God, and we don't know what they may have learned, what things about science God may have taught them that were lost in the ages. And so the stories follow a look of, maybe Abel asked his dad, how did God make the world? How did we get here? And then Adam would tell him, this is how God made the world. I asked God that too, and this is what happened. And so there's these stories that go through and kind of set that stage of, it's so easy to forget that Adam and Eve were also very real people with very real lives and very real families. And what would it have looked like the first time that Cain stepped on a thorn as his mom, pulling a thorn from your son's foot and knowing that it was your decision that caused this, and the explanation there. And giving your students an insight into, they were real people with real lives, and here's an imaginative look into maybe how something happened or how a discussion went down as they told and taught their children as well through that. And so that's a really fun component of it as well.
So it almost has a living book feel to it in the story.
Right.
How much Charlotte Mason, is it a Charlotte Mason influence in it? Is it, how would you relate it to the Charlotte Mason method?
It's very influenced by Charlotte Mason. There's a lot of hands-on. There's the story living component to it, the journaling through their notebook, and all of that. So it's very influenced.
What I like about the system that you have, of course, you've got the learning. So there's the day one is there's a story, it's context, there's that. The second day of the week gives room for application. So they're going to take that concept and wrestle it, right? And then the third day, which I think is probably one of the most profound, is that they're actually kind of teaching it to somebody else. And I know for me in life, if you want to grow spiritually, just have somebody come up to you and say, you're going to teach on the book of John next month to 100 people, and you will learn the book of John better than you ever knew it before, right? Teaching is how you really begin to learn. And that's why I think that's why God wants us to disciple other people, because we learn, we apply, and we teach, and that's where we really grow, is in the teaching. So the fact that you have them talking to people and sharing that testimony of what they've learned, I think, good job. That's pretty good. I like that.
Yeah, it's exciting. So for one example, the week that they learn about clouds, they'll learn about the different types of clouds in just a simplified level for a first grader. And then on the experience day, they're going to make their own cloud in a jar. And that is a lot of fun and very exciting. And then on the last day, they'll use cotton balls to construct the different types of clouds. And then they can take that page to someone and share, this is this type of cloud, and this is what this means in the sky. And maybe there's a memory verse that they can also talk about, or talk about how, you know, when there's storms, we don't have to fear because we know God, and those types of things. So it really enables them to take control of their learning experience and be able to share and make that connection.
Yeah, the one I'm looking at, I'm going to put up a sample of, is week 2. And it has, I know some of this is going to change because of the coloring in that, but it's like the parent answers are in the lighter. So it's got like you would read who made light, and it has the answer for the parent to be able to read it there. So it's all in one book and very easy for a parent to sit and do with a child. Okay.
Yeah, and it has that interactive component to it, a lot like phonics. My boys are very active with very short attention spans, and so our instruction tends to be very interactive because it keeps them focused and engaged. And so there's a lot of that interactive component to it, and that reminder of, this is what we explored last week. Do you remember what God made? They're recalling that knowledge, and so it's set up to enable that.
And then the experiment that they're doing to understand the speed of light is just a flashlight, turning it on and off and seeing how fast light appears. So it really helps them comprehend that.
Right, and that my sons got to guinea pig all of the experience, and that was probably one of their most favorites, because they thought that the light would travel slowly, and they turned on the flashlight and you can't watch the light, it's instant, and they were just completely blown away because they had taken the time to look and observe it, and they could not believe how fast light traveled. And we all have flashlights at home. And so science, again, is set up very much like phonics, where a lot of the materials you're either going to have on home, or the ones that you need will be easy to find and not very expensive. So it's set up, again, to be very manageable with the materials that you're going to need for the experiments.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I think this is going to be, I think it's going to be a huge hit. I like that it's only 3 days a week, that it provides structure, but it doesn't necessarily overwhelm. So there's enough for an attention span for a first grader, because I know with my grandsons especially, you know, you get a little bit of attention span and then you move on, but you can build on it. But there's enough room in the week that if you wanted to go and do more and experiment more, keep a nature journal, do any of those things, you could certainly, there's a lot of room to build upon it, but there's there's a good structure to fall back on. And keep it moving forward as well.
Right. And there's also bonus suggestions for conversation starters or activities. Maybe you can go to an aquarium or a zoo on a certain week. And so there's so much room to build on it and grow and create it into a family discussion, and just continue keeping that knowledge going beyond.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm excited about this course. A lot of us that have been looking at it and seeing it come in are also excited about it. I'm going to post the first 3 lessons, week 2, that lesson, the 3 days of week 2, so everybody can get an idea of what it's going to look like generally. I know that there's been some people really wanting to see it. Again, it's the rough draft, so just bear that in mind. So anything else you'd like to add about either Foundation Phonics or Let's Talk Science?
No, I don't think so.
I think it's exciting to see. One of the things that I mentioned early on is Carrie is my daughter. I was the principal of a private school. Carrie was in kindergarten. The first year was successful. The school that I was principal of, she went into 2nd grade, or into 1st grade. Help if I could count it. She went into 1st grade, and the first half of that year was pretty good. The second half of that year, things just really started to go downhill quickly. And there was a severe, where Carrie had a love for learning and discovery and all of that, it really changed. And suddenly, she just lost the joy of learning, right?
Yeah.
And so we knew that the Lord was pushing us to homeschool. And so Kristen withdrew Carrie from my school and started homeschooling. And that was the beginning of our journey many, many years ago. And so fast forward a little bit. Now Carrie was, I'm gonna give a little bit, and then I'm gonna let Carrie talk as well. But Carrie was an extremely strong-willed child. And she's that one that just closed down the restaurant, closed the supermarket down. It's hard to believe that now, but believe me, it was there. And so one day I had resigned from the school because now we're homeschooling, and I stayed on for a little while later, but then I took another position that required a lot of travel. And so I was flying, and in those days we had pagers, and my pager went off from home. And it's usually if I was traveling and my phone went off from home, it meant something was going on. So I got to LaGuardia Airport in New York City. I found a payphone and I called home. And the words I heard were, I've just expelled your daughter. I don't care what you do with her, but I'm no longer schooling her. I'm done. And and that began, I became Carrie's principal and had to figure out how to school her while I was traveling. I was traveling that year. There's a face. Meet my grandson, Gideon. I was traveling about 120 days a year, and had to figure out how to homeschool Carrie from the road. Now, Kristen still was a big part of that process, but the main responsibility of making sure you had work, you were doing your work, the scoring, all of those things, kind of fell on me, and I was pretty rough, really.
At times.
My goal, I traveled all the time, and I saw people who took their education seriously and people who didn't. And the people who didn't take their education seriously typically had to serve those who did. And so when Carrie didn't take her education seriously, I said, well, then I'm going to prepare you to serve those of us in the house who do take our education seriously. And there were seasons where you had to do all the chores, the cleaning, making the beds, cleaning the bathrooms, cooking the meals, everything, because I wanted you to be prepared for the life skills that you were going to need.
It didn't take too long to change my mind.
It did not. Proverbs, we implemented Proverbs as writing Proverbs. And again, Proverbs was written to instruct young leaders in how to be better leaders. And so it wasn't so much of a discipline as it was a way to instill the word of God and wisdom into Carrie. You wrote the book of Proverbs probably the most.
Yeah, I lost track of how many times I wrote the book of Proverbs.
Yeah, but you've said that so this is in public air, and you can say whatever's truthful. Do you regret having to write Proverbs?
No.
I mean, I'm sure you didn't want to write Proverbs, but the fact that you actually wrote Proverbs and what you learned from that process, was it helpful for you?
Yes. At the time, yes, I regretted having to write Proverbs. Looking back, it was a helpful experience.
Yeah. And when they would give me the book of Proverbs after they'd written it, I would tear it in half because I would want to let them know that I was done, right? We'd had the punishment. We were done. The crime, all of it was done. And there would always be that look of, I've labored to write this. Like, I sat at the table day and night until I wrote 31 chapters of Proverbs. And now you just shredded it in front of me. So we had some of these experiences, and I would ask her, we have a lot of moms who are wrestling right now with strong personalities, and they're doing the best they can. But what would you say were the turning points for you where, instead of the resistance and the fighting, you started to understand that kind of what was going on?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of key turning points. I always struggled with my strong will, my attitude. I didn't want to be told what to do. I would duke it out for sure. One major turning point was, I think it's really important to stay engaged with your child in the process and also be asking the Lord for wisdom, because the turning points came, I believe God just gave wisdom and the right words were said at the right time when my heart was soft, and it just completely changed the way that things had happened forward. And so one big moment is, my name means beautiful waterfall, and we were out on the porch. We lived next to Niagara Falls at the time, or within an hour or so drive, and we were talking, and Dad told me, you know what, you are a lot like Niagara Falls. And I was like, okay, how? And he said, there's so much beauty and so much power, but if we don't divert so much of the percentage of it into making electricity, it destroys itself, it destroys everything around it. And that made an impact in me. And from that moment on, I wanted to find a way to put all of my strength and all of my power and even my argumentative to use to a good purpose, so that it wouldn't destroy myself and it wouldn't destroy everyone that I loved in the process. And so I began looking for ways to divert that energy into something productive. And so I took up debate and argued and debate, but really began crafting a lot of that passion and those skills for something good, rather than just continuing to destroy everything and anything that came within my path. Another really big defining moment, I would say, is don't accept what the world has to say. I remember going to an event with my dad once, and we were standing there talking with someone, and someone had said, oh, just wait till she's a teenager. And I was really young, but I knew exactly what that meant. And at the time, I was feeling so hopeless within myself, because I was struggling so much to correct my attitude and not be so stubborn and all of this stuff. And every day it felt like I was just failing and failing and failing and failing. And at that moment, it really felt like, if this is the struggle that I have right now, and I'm continually failing, what's the point in trying if it's just going to go downhill from there? And I remember Dad saying, no, that's not the story I accept. And I don't remember really what he said from there, but basically that didn't have to be my story. And that was a real pivotal moment as well, because I realized that it didn't have to be my story, that my parents believed in me beyond just the horrible teenage years that were coming. And honestly, the teenage years ended up being some of the best in my life. They were still had their challenges. I still had my failures, but that really set the stage for me to know that someone believed in me, and that there was hope beyond what I was struggling in right there. And that by continuing to struggle and work and ask the Lord to change me and really rely on Him, there was hope for change in the future. And then the other thing I think is really just learning to recognize that it's not about the struggle today. One of my sons picked up my strong-willed traits, and it's a challenge when you're fighting about the shoes or you're fighting about the worksheet that he just needs to do. But at the same time, there's also so much power and strength that I know is in him if he chooses to use it wisely and surrender that to the Lord. And so in parenting, when that moment comes up where it's just like, can we just get through whatever it is that we need to get through? It's also raising him for who he will be as the man tomorrow. That's something that I really learned from you and Mom as my parents is keeping an eye on who they are tomorrow. It's not necessarily the struggle of today and the fight about the shoes. It's who we're training them to be tomorrow. I want him to be a man of the Lord. I want him to be a man who can surrender that strength to the Lord, who when his boss tells him to do something he needs to do, he knows how to do it and he can rein that within himself. And so keeping an eye on keeping your sights on the future, that it's not the overwhelm of today. You're training and preparing them and setting them up for a successful life in the future. And as the Lord gives you wisdom, just don't be afraid to speak that into your child, because you don't know what moment is the one that is going to impact them and make that change. And they'll begin making that change with the Lord and just begin relying on him and bringing all of that passion under God's control, and he can use it from there. So it's not hopeless for sure.
No, well, I think sometimes we have to be careful too, because in the culture, in everybody's cultures are different, but in the culture that we were in, parents are the boss, and you don't cross the line, because now it's a control issue and you're fighting for control, and we're going to be in charge and all of those things. And so early on, with strong-willed, it was more trying to make you comply because we weren't going to be disrespected, or I wasn't going to be disrespected. I was going to have your respect. I was going to teach you how to respect. And then it kind of transitioned to more of, no, what do I want to see and what do I hope for as when you're an adult? Because you would start talking about going into the mission field and some different things. And I was like, well, if you're standing in front of some people in another culture, you need to understand how to kind of work the lay of the land and work with the culture, and you need to control your emotions in order to do that. So it really came down to more of an emotional health issue and helping you develop emotional health than it was about just having you respect me. And I think that was a pivotal spot for us as parents as well, because if all you're fighting for is, no, you're going to do what I say because I'm the boss, and you then that's going to produce rebellion more than I'm partnering with you to help you for success in life.
Right.
That aspect is crucial, I think, in working with our strong-willed kids, because that's the example God gives us, right? So I tend to be a thick-headed child of God, and he works with me for my own good, for my future, for my eternal purposes. And that's the example he sets for me. And so I think that's the example that we want to adopt as well, is we're really doing this and working towards their futures. And our kids need strength. We need strong-willed. We need kids who have resolve, who have a mental toughness, who will stand up against the peer pressure, because there's a lot of pressure to conform. And sometimes as parents, we forget what it's like to be homeschooled, and sometimes to have to stand out like a sore thumb, right? I mean, it wasn't always easy to be the homeschooled family with 9 kids. Where we drove a 12-passenger van, the same van that all of the state facilities drove clients around in. So we were homeschooled in a 12-passenger van, and we just stood out like a sore thumb. It's hard not to, what would you say? What's that word where you kind of manifest, or you behave out a little bit to just be not that, right? So the story, even though Carrie got expelled and her and I worked together, I was her principal for the rest of the time, and Kristen did all the bulk. She really found the best solutions. She found the systems that were going to work in place, and we just kind of worked together to make sure that it worked. And we joke about it a lot, but Carrie graduated. She did run our customer service department and did a fantastic job with that. And I'm not kidding. If moms only knew that there was a 17-year-old student who was actually coaching them through the homeschool process, but you did. You walked a lot of them off the cliff and got them through some pretty serious stuff. and then went on to Liberty University, where you actually were on the dean's list at Liberty.
Yep.
Mom was
Yep.
a little bitter about that because it was like, well, where did this come from, right? And then we've had the privilege of watching Carrie develop as a mom, as a wife, and also in developing the curriculum. And so one of the reasons that my heart would love to share this story with you is I know some of you are in this place where you just banging heads today. And it's like, why does it have to be this fight? Well, I would encourage you to thank God for their strengths. Pray for wisdom, like Carrie said, because wisdom, if we pray for wisdom, Scripture says if we ask for wisdom, He will give us wisdom. We can count on that. So we need to ask for wisdom. And then just pray that He also brings in the right influences and the right people at the right time, the right voices at the right time. But I think, would you agree with this, Carrie? When you have a mighty river, the paths are shaped faster.
Mm-hmm.
And you really have to be careful of the influences with strong-willed children because they tend to dig deeper neural pathways quickly, if you will.
Right. And it's easier to gravitate towards a negative pathway because that's already the bent in the direction. If I don't have to fight it as a child, yes, I can dig in deeper to that. Whereas if I'm called to more, I'm going to naturally have to struggle with that a little bit. And so it's harder as a kid to want to go that direction.
Yes. And that's something that I think just be very cautious about what influences are in your student's life, because music, culture, friends, a lot of these things tended to have a really big impact on you as a child. And sometimes just removing an influence would have a huge impact on your attitude and your willingness to work together. I won't say we were perfect parents by any means. The grace of God has gotten us to where we are, but there is hope. And I say this over and over again, but all of these kids, they have a purpose. There's a plan. The homeschooling movement is essential to the kingdom of God and what God is doing in the future. These kids are, the Lord is laying a foundation. These are the Daniels, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're the ones that are getting the diet that the Lord has prepared for them. And they are going to be future leaders. They're going to stand in front of very hateful people and give defense for their faith. They're going to be the ones that turn God's people back to God. And it is so important that we realize that these kids have a calling on their lives, and some of those kids are going to need to be tough as nails. And praise God that we get to come alongside them and help shape them and prepare them for the call that God has on their lives. All right. So sorry about that. But Carrie, you have anything to add to that?
Nope, couldn't agree more to that.
Awesome. Well, I'm proud of you, Carrie, and I'm glad that you joined me today. It is a privilege to be able to sit on this platform with you and discuss something that is so near and dear to our hearts. And to also, for me, this is the second generation, the next generation homeschool beginning to step into the call that God has for them. And some of you that were homeschooled, the seeds that were planted, the sacrifices that were made, God has platforms for you to begin to step onto. All of the years that were invested into you, there was a purpose. And I am so excited to see the next generation begin to come into their call. So, all right, I'm going to stop because I just am. Hey, well, thank you, Carrie, again for joining me.
Thank you.
We've had a couple of flybys. Gideon's given me a couple of flybys. So, hey guys, I hope this was a blessing to you, and I will get some pictures of this up today so that you can see what the pictures at least 1 week would look like of the Let's Talk Science. And if you have any questions, be sure to post. Carrie's part of the group as well. You're willing to answer questions and whatnot as well. All right. God bless you guys. Have a fantastic week. Thursday's teaching tips, we will be talking about preparing your school year for 2019-2020, making it the best it's ever been. I believe it can be. God bless you guys. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.